Pray to masks. So you should have read the poem before we go through this lesson together. Try to understand what the poem is about and highlight words that you do not understand. Please also go and try to highlight any figures of speech that you can find in the poem. It's very important to understand the background of this poem. So the poem was written at a time that Africa was gaining independence from colonization. It was a very difficult and violent time, and the poet became president of Senegal in 1960. This poem is essentially about the relationship between Europe and Africa and what happened to African culture when these African countries gained independence. The masks are symbolic. They represent ancestors and African culture. So very, very important that you understand what these masks represent in the poem. And it was a belief that whoever wore the mask would have a direct connection with the ancestors in the spirit world. And the pronouns, the use of I and you is important. I is the first person speaker, makes us feel closer to the speaker. And the you creates a feeling of inclusion. So it draws the reader in. So take note of which pronouns are being used. The themes. So these are 5 themes that are introduced in this poem. What you can do is on your poem, maybe highlight each one in different colors and write next to those lines which theme is appearing. Oppression and discrimination, ancestors and their role and honoring the ancestors, the desire for freedom, new beginnings, adapting to the Western world after the end of colonization. If you don't know what colonization is, it would be good for you to ask a friend to talk to you about it, or read up on it, or see if you can find something that you can watch on YouTube. So it's important that you understand what colonization is, because this poem is about the end of colonization. So it begins, masks, oh masks. The speaker directly addresses the masks. The masks are also personified here. And the speaker is talking to them as if they are people. This figure of speech is called apostrophe. So please make very careful notes as you go through this poem. You should be making your own notes. Take note of the exclamation marks. These are to show strong emotion or to emphasize the mask, because masks are a representation of African culture. And as we said before, the masks are the connection to the ancestors. Black mask, red mask, you black and white masks, rectangular masks through whom the spirit breathes. So again, emphasize again, the masks represent African culture and connection to the ancestors. And it was believed that whoever wore the mask could directly communicate with the ancestors in the spirit world. Here they mention different colors. So these may represent different cultures. And the spirit, when the poet mentions spirit, that is talking about the ancestors who are still present in people's lives. Even though they have died, their influence and their presence is still in the lives of their descendants. I greet you in silence. Once again, take note of the pronoun. First person I makes it personal. So there is no need for words because he is greeting the ancestors who are of the spirit world, and perhaps they can feel his presence and do not need words because he can feel their presence and they can feel his presence. The exclamation mark emphasizes the silence and also gives a sense of this communication with ancestors being something very sacred. It happens in silence. And you too, my lion-headed ancestor. So what is the lion-headed ancestor? It refers to a traditional African mask in the shape of a lion's head. And of course, a lion represents bravery or courage. So there is a picture of what this lion-headed mask will look like. It's also important that the Senegalese national anthem is called the Red Lion, and it's Senghor's family guardian animal. So that was the guardian animal of his family. Maybe you can ask your parents if they know what the guardian animal for your family is. Maybe some of you know that already. You guard this place that is close to any feminine laughter, to any smile. So this place is the life, the afterlife, life after death. Women were not allowed there. And this is because this was a patriarchy. Patriarchy is a culture that is dominated by men. Mortal means living. So the living also cannot enter the world of the ancestors. And the you that he refers to is the lion-headed ancestor, which is the guardian of the spiritual world. So it could have been a space in the village where perhaps they had a space that was specifically for where people go to worship the ancestors, and women were not allowed there because of the patriarchy, the patriarchal culture. You purify the air of eternity, here where I breathe the air of my fathers. So you, once again, is talking about the lion-headed ancestor, his family's guardian animal, that ancestor. Eternity is the spiritual world or a sacred place. And the ancestors, he believes, cleanse that spiritual world. Masks of maskless faces, free from dimples and wrinkles. The masks represent the ancestors, and because they are masked, they would not age like a normal person would. So there would not be dimples and wrinkles. We will come back to the meaning of maskless faces. You have composed this image, this my face that bends over the altar of white paper. So again, the you refers to the ancestors. You have composed this image. The image is the speaker. So the ancestors have shaped who that person is as a person. As your ancestors and my ancestors have shaped who we are today. their influence is passed down through the generations. The altar of white paper. So an altar would be a place of worship. A white paper could have two meanings. So it could be the paper on which the speaker is writing a poem, the literal meaning, or it refers to the creating of laws by the government and all the paperwork involved. So it's politics and lawmaking, which would have been brought to Africa by Europe. So that the altar of white paper will have two different interpretations. In the name of your image, listen to me. So once again, apostrophe. He is addressing the masks directly. The speaker appeals to the masks or the ancestors. So that word is apostrophe when the speaker addresses a personified object. Now, while the Africa of despotism is dying, it is the agony of a pitiable princess. So despotism refers to dictatorship. And that would be the dictatorship of colonial rule. And this would be coming to an end in 1945. So this, when Africa was colonized, and he's talking about this time in the history of Africa is now dying. It is the end. But there is agony. There's a lot of suffering that comes with this, with the European powers pulling out of Africa. There was a lot of violence and a lot of suffering. And the princess represents the nobility and the death of noble culture and traditions, which could have come about due to colonization. But basically that line means that there was a lot of suffering and difficulty when colonization ended. Like that of Europe, to whom she is connected through the navel. So here is a simile. The decline of Africa is compared to the decline of Europe, which was suffering after World War II. Through the navel, so Europe and Africa are connected to each other like a mother and baby through the umbilical cord. So there you can see in the picture, the baby connected to the mother through the umbilical cord. And that would be a metaphor. And this could imply that there has been this dependency between Africa and Europe, that there was a relationship of dependency where Europe was the mother country. However, Europe took all the mineral wealth and land from the colonies. So this was not a nurturing, it wasn't a positive relationship. Now fix your immobile eyes upon your children who have been called. Immobile is not moving, and that is the eyes of the masks that are not moving. The children is going to be the next generation who fight for freedom and who sacrifice their lives, like the poor man, his last garment. So these young people who stand up to fight for true freedom in Africa are compared to a poor man who gives away his last clothing. So it implies that they make a huge sacrifice. Take note of this figure of speech, which is a simile. So that hereafter we may cry here at the rebirth of the world, being the leaven that the white flour needs. The rebirth of the world is when colonization ends. It is the opportunity for Africa to be reborn, and this is a personification. The rebirth of the world, highlight, underline all your figures of speech. Leaven is yeast or a raising agent, and it represents those who fight for change. Figure of speech is a metaphor So the young people who stand up are the leaven. They are the yeast that is needed for Africa to rise. The white flour is Africa. For who else would teach rhythm to the world that has died of machines and cannons? Rhythm represents music, culture, and life originating in Africa. The machines and cannons is industrialization and warfare. And so he's saying there it is this industrialization that has killed the spirit of Africa, and it's music and culture that will bring it to life again. For who else would ejaculate the cry of joy that arouses the dead and the wise in a new dawn? Line 16 shows that Africa brings joy and energy to the world. Sorry, that's line 17. It is a new dawn which represents hope with the end of a colonization and the possibility of something new appearing. Ejaculate would mean cry out. So this end of colonization also brings joy and hope of something new, something a lot more authentic, where African culture can now breathe and people can express themselves and be proud of who they are. Say, who else could return the memory of life to men with a torn hope? So here is a rhetorical question. Remember what you were taught, that a rhetorical question makes the reader think about the issue. They call us cottonheads and coffee men and oily men. So they are the colonizers, and the cottonheads, coffee men, and oily men are kind of insulting labels that were given to black men. They were not complimentary. Cottonheads refers to people who worked in cotton plantations. So we know that was the history of slavery in America, that people were brought to work in the cotton plantations. The coffee men are the people who worked on coffee plantations, and oily men are people who extracted palm oil, and basically people who worked, African people who worked either as slaves or for a very, very low pay. They call us men of death. So they, again, refers to the colonizers. So it's another label which refers to African people as savage and dangerous. And these lines illustrate the theme of oppression. But we are the soil, men of the dance, whose feet only gain power when they beat the hard soil. So it ends on a hopeful note. Dance represents freedom and pride in tradition. Soil shows that they are connected to the earth. And this line, it's very hopeful because it shows the resilient spirit of African people in spite of what has happened, what has been done to them. I want you to go through the memo. So the memo corresponds with the questions in your workbook. You can read each question and check your answers according to this memo.